My daughter-in-law told me the family reunion was just for close family. Funny thing was, half the house they were celebrating in had been paid for with my money. I stayed quiet. Until 2 weeks later, when I looked out my kitchen window and saw her walking across my backyard with a property assessor, measuring my home like I was already dead. They thought I was just an old widow they could push aside. What they didn't know was that I already had a buyer, a lawyer, and a plan. And what happened next, no one saw coming. The text came in at 7:14 on a gray Tuesday morning. I was standing alone in my kitchen, one hand wrapped around a cup of coffee that had already gone cold. The wall clock ticked loud enough to irritate me. Outside, the backyard looked washed out under the pale Massachusetts sky. Inside, every chair at the dining table sat empty. My phone buzzed again. Claire. Margaret, we decided to keep the family reunion small this year. Just us, the kids, and a few close relatives. You probably need peace and quiet anyway. I read it twice. Not because I didn't understand it. Because I did. The message was polite. Soft. Carefully worded. That almost made it worse. No screaming. No insult. Just a clean little sentence designed to move me quietly out of the picture. I stared at the kitchen window, watching my own reflection blur against the glass. Close relatives. Funny phrase. Half the money for the lake house reunion had come from me. The patio furniture Claire loved posting online? Mine. The new grill Daniel bragged about every summer? Mine too. Even the matching holiday sweaters for the grandchildren had somehow landed on my credit card last December. But suddenly I wasn't close family enough to sit at the table. That was the moment something cold settled in my chest. Because the most painful part wasn't being excluded. It was realizing they still expected my money to be included. I set the coffee down slowly. My hand trembled once, barely noticeable. How long has it been? I whispered into the empty room. How long since they stopped seeing me as family? No answer came back. Only the ticking clock. Daniel hadn't texted. Not a single word. That hurt more than Claire's message ever could. My son had always hated conflict. Even as a child, he would stand frozen while other people made decisions for him. After his father died 4 years earlier, that weakness only grew worse. Claire filled every silence for him now. And Daniel let her. Every time. I walked toward the hallway cabinet and opened the bottom drawer. Inside sat my old leather checkbook beside a stack of mortgage statements bundled neatly with paper clips. Above them rested a framed photo of my late husband, Walter, smiling in front of the first house we ever bought together. We worked our whole lives for stability, I murmured softly. Not for this. For years, helping Daniel had felt natural. Necessary, even. When interest rates climbed, I helped with the mortgage. When Claire wanted kitchen renovations, I covered part of it. When the grandchildren needed school tuition, summer camp, piano lessons, somehow I always reached for my wallet before they even asked. I used to tell myself that was what mothers did. But standing there in the cold morning light, staring at decades of canceled checks and payment records, another question slipped quietly into my mind. Had I really been helping them out of love? Or had I been paying to make sure they never left me behind? The thought hit harder than the text message. I swallowed carefully, then pulled open the filing drawer the rest of the way. And for the first time in years, I started looking at the numbers differently. Looking back, I couldn't even pinpoint the exact moment Claire took control of my son. It happened slowly. Quietly. Like fog creeping under a door. At first, Daniel still called me on his own. He used to stop by after work, sit at my kitchen counter, complain about traffic, ask about dinner. After Walter died, those visits became less frequent. Then Claire started answering his phone more often. "Oh, Daniel's exhausted. Oh, we already made plans. Oh, this weekend's just really busy for us." Always polite. Always smiling. That was Claire's talent. She never sounded cruel. She made exclusion sound reasonable. Even when she asked for money, she wrapped it in concern. "Margaret, we hate asking. Daniel feels terrible about this. We're just under a little pressure right now." And every single time, Daniel stayed silent in the background. Sometimes I could actually hear him breathing nearby while Claire spoke for both of them. That silence started bothering me more than her words ever did. Because there are people who don't need to raise their voice to control a room. They just train everyone else to stop speaking. I walked back to the dining table and sat down slowly. The house felt too still. Then I opened the folder completely. Transfer after transfer. Check after check. Emergency payment after emergency payment. $5,000 for the kitchen remodel. $3,000 when Daniel's investment opportunity fell apart. Monthly mortgage support. School tuition. Vacation deposits. I stared at the numbers until my eyes blurred. No wonder Claire always sounded calm. She'd never had to fear consequences before. A strange feeling settled over me. Not rage. Something colder. Clarity. And if you've ever had that terrible moment when you realized people only remembered you when they needed something from you, stay with me until the end of this story. Because I truly believe I was helping my family. Until I discovered I was simply financing them. That realization changed everything. By noon, I had spread every financial document across the kitchen table. My pension statements. Bank records. Insurance payments. Mortgage transfers. The pattern was impossible to ignore now. I wasn't the heart of the family anymore. I was the emergency fund. The backup plan. The invisible wallet everyone assumed would stay open forever. And the worst part? They had stopped pretending otherwise. I leaned back in my chair and looked around the empty kitchen again. The silence didn't feel sad anymore. It felt insulting. For years, I'd convinced myself that being needed meant being loved. But love doesn't disappear the second the money stops. That afternoon, I grabbed my purse, my car keys, and the green financial folder. Then I drove straight to the bank. The bank parking lot was almost empty when I pulled in. Cold wind scraped across the pavement as I stepped out with the green folder pressed tightly against my chest. Inside, the fluorescent lights made everything look harsh. Honest. Maybe that was fitting. I sat down at one of the small customer desks near the back wall and slowly opened the folder again. A calculator sat beside me. Highlighter in hand. Years of financial records stacked in neat piles like evidence waiting for trial. And for the first time, I stopped looking at those payments like acts of love. I started looking at them like transactions. The mortgage came first. Every month for almost 8 years, I had quietly transferred money to help Daniel and Claire keep that beautiful lake house afloat. At the beginning, it made sense. Daniel had lost a major client. Claire had just left her job after Lily was born. "It's temporary, Mom," Daniel had promised me back then. "Just until we recover." Temporary stretched into years. Then came the pool installation. Claire wanted a better environment for the children. That was how she phrased it over dinner one night while showing me photos on her phone. "It'll make the house feel more like a real family home," she'd said with that soft little smile. The project cost nearly $20,000. Somehow, $8,000 of it ended up coming from me. After that came piano lessons, private tutoring, soccer camp, emergency dental work. Every crisis arrived wrapped in urgency. "Mom, we're in a tight spot." "Margaret, we hate asking." "Just this once." "Always just this once." I punched another number into the calculator. The total climbed higher. Vacation rescue. I actually laughed under my breath at that one. 2 summers ago, Claire called me crying from Arizona because Daniel's credit card had been frozen during a resort vacation. They were stranded with the kids in the hotel lobby. "You're the only person we can rely on," she whispered dramatically. So I wired the money immediately. Airfare upgrades included. At the time, helping them made me feel needed. Important. Now, staring at the highlighted statements under those ugly bank lights, it felt different. It felt organized. Systematic. Like they had built an entire lifestyle around the assumption that I would always absorb the damage. I leaned back slowly and rubbed my forehead. The betrayal wasn't loud. That was the strange part. No one had screamed at me. No one had stolen from my purse in the middle of the night. Instead, they had done something quieter. They turned generosity into obligation. And once people start believing your help belongs to them, gratitude disappears frighteningly fast. The calculator screen flashed the final number. $58,412. I stared at it for a long moment. Then I whispered softly to myself, "They called it help, right up until the moment I stopped paying." I closed the folder slowly and carried it to the teller counter. The young banker smiled politely when he recognized me. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Whitmore. What can we help you with today?" For a second, I almost answered automatically. Just another transfer. Another rescue mission. Another check written to keep everyone comfortable. But something inside me had shifted during the last hour. I slid the paperwork across the counter instead. "I'd like to cancel all automatic transfers connected to Daniel Whitmore's mortgage account." The banker blinked once. "I'm sorry, all of them?" "Yes." The word came out calmer than I expected. No shaking voice. No dramatic speech. Just yes. He glanced down at the account history, probably noticing how long those payments had been running. Monthly. Consistent. Reliable. Unlike the people receiving them. "And the joint maintenance account?" he asked carefully. "Close it." He hesitated. "Effective immediately?" I looked directly at him. Effective today. The clicking of his keyboard suddenly sounded louder than the entire bank. That was the strange thing about life-changing decisions. Sometimes they arrived without music, without tears, without explosions. Just paperwork. As the banker processed the requests, I stared out the large front window at the passing traffic. People carrying groceries. Someone walking a dog. A teenager laughing into his phone. The whole world moving normally while my family quietly collapsed in the background. And somewhere in the middle of that silence, a question settled into my chest like a stone. If I disappeared tomorrow, would they miss me? Or would they miss the money? The answer came too quickly. I signed the final form. Then another one. Mortgage support canceled. Pool maintenance payments canceled. Utility assistance removed. The first domino had finally tipped. Walking out of the bank felt oddly peaceful. Not empowering. Not triumphant. Just honest. For years, I had confused sacrifice with love. Now I was beginning to understand the difference. By the time I reached my car, my phone was already vibrating inside my purse. Claire. Of course. I let it ring once. Twice. 3 times. Then answered. Her voice floated through the speaker coated in artificial warmth. Margaret. Hi, sweetheart. I was just calling because the pool company said the payment didn't go through. It's probably just some silly bank issue. I leaned back against the driver's seat and closed my eyes briefly. No, how are you? No mention of the reunion text. Straight to the money. Not a bank issue, I said quietly. I stopped the payment. A pause. Tiny. Tight. Oh, Claire laughed softly, too quickly. Well, I'm sure we can sort that out. Daniel's been overwhelmed lately and that's my responsibility? I interrupted. The silence on the line sharpened instantly. Claire adjusted her tone again. Softer this time. Careful. Margaret, nobody meant to upset you. I looked down at the stack of cancellation receipts sitting on the passenger seat beside me. For the first time in years, I felt absolutely clear. I'm not upset, Claire, I said calmly. I just stopped financing people who no longer treat me like family. The line went quiet. Not awkward quiet. Dangerous quiet. I could almost picture Claire standing in her bright kitchen, one hand gripping the phone tighter now, recalculating the situation in real time. When she finally spoke again, her sweetness sounded thinner. Well, I think you're overreacting a little. There it was. Not concern. Not apology. Management. I stared through the windshield at the gray clouds hanging low over the parking lot. For a strange second, everything suddenly connected with painful clarity. The reunion invitation. The polite exclusion. The missing calls from Daniel. The immediate panic over canceled payments. Claire didn't care whether I showed up at the family table. She cared whether my money did. That realization hit harder than any insult could have. Because humiliation changes shape when money enters it. You stop wondering whether people love you. You start wondering whether they ever did. I'm sure Daniel will call once things calm down, Claire added carefully, testing the waters again. I almost laughed. Daniel hadn't called when I was excluded. He hadn't called after the canceled payments either. But somehow the pool company noticed my absence within hours. That told me everything. You know what's funny, Claire? I said softly. What? I wasn't family enough to attend the reunion. I paused just long enough to let the words settle. But apparently I'm still family enough to pay for it. Dead silence. No fake laugh this time. No polished response. Just breathing on the other end of the line. Then Claire's voice hardened slightly. That's unfair. No, I replied calmly. What's unfair is spending years treating someone like an emotional safety net, then acting surprised when they finally step away. I ended the call before she could answer. For several seconds, I simply sat there holding the phone in my lap. My heartbeat felt strangely steady now. Not broken. Not emotional. Resolved. And if you've ever had the painful realization that your kindness was being mistaken for permanent access, comment the word enough. Because sometimes the hardest thing in life isn't leaving toxic people behind. It's accepting that they were comfortable using you all along. A cold gust of wind rattled the side of the car. I looked down at the green folder again, then toward the busy street ahead of me. The humiliation was gone now. In its place sat something far more dangerous. A plan. I unlocked my phone one more time and scrolled to an old contact I hadn't spoken to in years. Gregory Hale. Real estate broker. My thumb hovered over the call button for only a second. Then I pressed it. Gregory answered on the third ring. Margaret? Wow, it's been a while. His warm voice almost pulled me backward into easier years. Back before Walter died. Back before every family conversation quietly circled around money. I need a property valuation, I said without wasting time. Private. No listings yet. There was a short pause. Then Gregory's tone shifted immediately into business. Understood. We arranged to meet the following morning. After I hung up, I sat motionless in the car for a long moment, staring at my reflection in the rearview mirror. And suddenly, memories I'd ignored for years started rearranging themselves into something uglier. Claire had never openly demanded my house. That would have been too obvious. Instead, she planted little comments like seeds. Tiny things. Easy to dismiss at the time. Margaret, this place must be exhausting for one person. You know, some retirement communities are actually beautiful now. Imagine how much simpler life would feel without all this maintenance. Always smiling. Always sounding concerned. At Christmas 2 years earlier, she had wandered through my living room running her fingers along the crown molding while casually asking, "So, have you updated your will recently?" I remembered laughing awkwardly back then. Now the memory made my stomach tighten. There had been other moments too. Claire asking Daniel in front of me whether the upstairs could eventually become a playroom for the grandchildren. Claire suggesting they temporarily store furniture in my basement because their garage was full. Claire once joking over wine, "Well, technically this house will stay in the family anyway." At the time, I convinced myself she was trying to make me feel included. But sitting there now, every conversation suddenly sounded different. Calculated. A slow emotional conditioning process designed to make my disappearance feel natural before it ever happened. A chill crept through me despite the heater running inside the car. Because the truly horrifying part wasn't the greed. It was the patience. Claire hadn't been reacting to opportunity. She'd been preparing for it. And the more I thought about it, the more one terrible question kept circling through my mind like a blade. Were they waiting for me to grow old and dependent? Or were they simply waiting for me to die? The next morning, I drove downtown before Daniel or Claire could decide to check in on me. Gregory's real estate office sat on the corner of an old brick building overlooking the harbor. The place smelled faintly of coffee, printer ink, and polished wood. Familiar. Professional. Safe. For the first time in days, I felt like I was standing on solid ground again. Gregory spread several documents across his desk while a large property map glowed softly on the screen behind him. "Margaret," he said carefully, adjusting his glasses, "your house is worth significantly more than you probably realize." I folded my arms tightly. How quickly could it sell? That question made him study me differently. Not like an old widow making future plans. Like someone preparing for impact. "In this market," he replied. Very quickly. He slid a folder toward me. Comparable sales. Buyer demand reports. Estimated closing numbers. My eyes moved across the pages automatically. Years of accounting work had trained me to find patterns faster than emotions. And one pattern stood out immediately. I didn't need Daniel financially. Daniel needed me. That realization changed the balance of power so suddenly it almost frightened me. Gregory leaned back slightly. "There's actually a couple from Connecticut looking for exactly this type of property. Quiet neighborhood. Large lot. Cash ready. Cash ready." The phrase echoed in my chest. For years, Claire had treated my home like a future inheritance waiting patiently in the background. Meanwhile, I had continued acting like a temporary guest inside my own life. "No more. Keep this confidential," I told him firmly. "No signs. No online listing yet. I don't want my family hearing rumors." Gregory nodded immediately. Understood. When I left the office, the cold air outside felt sharper somehow. Cleaner. Empowerment doesn't arrive loudly. Sometimes it begins as paperwork inside a manila folder. By the time I got home, my nerves had steadied into something controlled and dangerous. Then I saw Daniel's car in the driveway. My stomach tightened instantly. He was already standing on the porch when I stepped out of my vehicle, hands shoved awkwardly into his coat pockets. "Mom," he looked exhausted. Pale. Avoiding my eyes the same way he had since childhood whenever he knew he'd disappointed someone. I unlocked the front door slowly. "What are you doing here?" He followed me inside but stayed near the entryway instead of sitting down. That alone told me Claire had sent him. "Claire said things got tense yesterday," he muttered. "She thinks maybe you misunderstood the reunion thing." I stared at him. Not once had he said, "We miss you." Or, "We want you there." Only damage control. "She misunderstood?" I asked quietly. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck. "It's just been stressful lately. Money's tight. The kids are busy. Claire's overwhelmed. Every sentence sounded borrowed. Rehearsed. I waited. He still wouldn't look directly at me. And right there, standing in my own hallway with my son avoiding my eyes like a guilty stranger, the final piece clicked into place. The silence of your son, I said softly, is sometimes the loudest answer a mother will ever get. Daniel finally looked up. But by then, it was already too late. Daniel stood there another few seconds like he wanted to say something meaningful. Something that could still repair the crack spreading through the room between us. But he didn't. Instead, he sighed softly and glanced toward the basement door. By the way, he added too casually, I might need to stop by this weekend for some inventory boxes. The business stuff's still downstairs. Business stuff. That was a generous description for the mountain of unopened packages, cheap office shelves, and abandoned equipment he had been storing in my basement for nearly 2 years without paying a single dollar toward utilities or space. At first, I allowed it because he was getting things off the ground. Then because the market got rough. Then because Claire insisted they were almost stable again. Everything with them was always almost. I looked toward the basement door myself. The old brass key still hung on the small hook beside the laundry room. Daniel had access whenever he wanted. Day or night. Sometimes he came by when I wasn't even home. Back then, I told myself that was normal. Now it suddenly felt invasive. How long do you need to keep those things there? I asked. Daniel shrugged. Not much longer. Another vague answer. Another invisible extension with no real ending attached to it. I nodded slowly. Actually, I think it's time to clear the basement out. His eyes lifted immediately. What? I'm downsizing my life, I said calmly. I need the space back. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. Mom, come on. It's not hurting anything. That sentence almost made me laugh. No, the boxes weren't hurting the basement. The entitlement behind them was hurting me. I'll give you a few days, I said. After that, I'm changing access. His face tightened slightly. You're really serious about all this? For the first time in years, I answered without guilt. Yes. He left soon after. No hug. No warmth. Just tension trailing behind him like cigarette smoke after the front door closed. That evening, I drove to a hardware store across town and bought new locks. Basement door. Side entrance. Storage gate in the backyard. The young cashier smiled while ringing them up. Big security upgrade? You could say that, I replied quietly. Later that night, I stood alone in the basement while the new lock clicked into place. The sound echoed strangely through the concrete walls. Sharp. Final. It wasn't really about the door. It was about finally understanding that boundaries only feel cruel to people who benefited from you having none. Upstairs, the house settled into silence again. But 2 weeks later, that silence would shatter completely. Because one Friday morning, I heard unfamiliar voices coming from my backyard. At first, I thought the voices belonged to landscapers. I was standing in the kitchen rinsing a coffee mug when I heard footsteps crunching across the gravel path behind the house. Low conversation. A man's voice. Then Claire laughing softly. My stomach tightened immediately. Claire never came by unannounced anymore. Not after the bank. Not after the locks changed. I dried my hands slowly and walked toward the sliding glass door. The moment I looked outside, something inside me went completely cold. Claire was standing in the backyard wearing dark sunglasses and a cream-colored coat, her heels sinking slightly into the wet grass as she pointed toward the rear windows. Beside her stood a gray-haired man in a navy suit holding a clipboard and laser measuring tool. They weren't visiting. They were evaluating. The man stepped backward, studying the roofline carefully while scribbling notes. Claire crossed her arms and tilted her head toward the upstairs balcony exactly the way real estate agents do during private tours. I couldn't move for a second. Because suddenly every strange conversation from the past few years came flooding back all at once. The retirement home comments. The inheritance jokes. The questions about my will. The pressure to simplify my life. God. They had been planning around my disappearance long before I realized it. Claire pointed toward the side yard. The drainage gets bad over there during winter, she explained casually, like she already owned the property. But the lot size makes up for it. The appraiser nodded while marking something down. I felt physically sick. Not because they wanted the house. Because they were behaving as if I were already gone. As if my entire existence had been reduced to paperwork waiting for signatures. People think betrayal always arrives loudly. Sometimes it walks across your backyard in high heels carrying a clipboard. The appraiser crouched near the basement windows next. Claire followed him carefully, one hand holding her coat closed against the wind. Then she smiled. Actually smiled. That was the moment disgust finally overpowered shock. They're acting like I'm dead already, I whispered to myself. They're just waiting for the paperwork. My pulse hammered hard enough to shake my hands. But strangely, my mind stayed clear. Sharper than ever. I watched Claire point toward the detached storage shed, the same shed Daniel used freely for years while contributing nothing. The appraiser measured the distance between structures. This wasn't curiosity anymore. This was preparation. A legal one. And suddenly one terrifying possibility crashed into me. Were they trying to pressure me into selling? Or worse, preparing to argue I could no longer manage the property alone? The thought snapped something loose inside my chest. Enough. I unlocked the sliding glass door with one hard movement. Then I stepped outside. The screen door slammed behind me hard enough to make both of them turn. Claire froze first. For a split second, genuine panic flashed across her face before the performance returned. That polished smile. That fake calm she always wore when she needed control back. Margaret, she said too brightly. Oh good, you're home. We were just, who is this? I cut in sharply, staring directly at the man with the clipboard. He straightened immediately. Richard Coleman, ma'am. Certified property appraiser. Of course he was. His eyes moved nervously between me and Claire now, clearly realizing he had walked into something much uglier than a routine inspection. Claire stepped forward quickly. It's not what it looks like. I almost laughed at that. Because it looked exactly like what it was. A man is measuring my property while you discuss drainage problems in my backyard, I said coldly. So please. Tell me what else this could possibly look like. Claire crossed her arms tighter. Daniel's been worried about insurance values with the market changing. We were only trying to help. Help. That word again. Every manipulation in my life had arrived disguised as concern. I looked at the appraiser. Did my daughter-in-law tell you she owns this house? His face changed instantly. No, ma'am, she only said, Claire interrupted fast. Margaret, don't make this dramatic. Dramatic. The woman secretly evaluating my home behind my back was accusing me of overreacting. Something inside me finally snapped clean in half. You excluded me from the family reunion, I said, my voice low but deadly steady. But somehow you still felt entitled to walk through my property like future owners. Claire's expression hardened. You're twisting everything. No, I fired back. I'm finally seeing it clearly. The wind pushed against the trees above us, rattling dead autumn leaves across the yard. Nobody moved. Then I looked directly at her and said the one thing I think she never expected me to say out loud. Real family doesn't appraise you before you're dead. The words hit hard enough to visibly shake the appraiser beside her. He cleared his throat awkwardly and took a small step backward. Mrs. Whitmore, perhaps I should leave. Yes, I replied immediately. You should. Claire spun toward him. Richard, wait, before she could finish, the side gate creaked open behind them. Howard Bennett stepped into view. Tall. Broad-shouldered. Gray-haired. A retired firefighter with the kind of silent physical presence that made most arguments end before they started. He had probably heard the raised voices from next door. Howard didn't ask questions. Didn't threaten anyone. He simply stood there near the open gate with his arms folded across his chest, calmly taking in the scene. That alone changed the atmosphere instantly. The appraiser's posture collapsed first. I really think I should go, he muttered, already clutching his clipboard tighter. Howard gave him one slow nod. Nothing more. No aggression. No performance. Just enough quiet authority to remind everyone standing there exactly whose property this actually was. The appraiser left almost immediately after that, walking fast toward his car without looking back once. And for the first time since this nightmare began. Claire looked uncertain. For a few long seconds, nobody spoke. The wind moved through the backyard in uneven gusts, lifting strands of Claire's hair across her face. She looked nothing like the polished woman who had walked onto my property 20 minutes earlier. Now she looked cornered. Dangerous people usually do when control slips away. Claire glanced toward the street where the appraiser's car had just disappeared, then back at me. The mask finally cracked. Oh my God, she snapped suddenly. Do you hear yourself right now? You're acting completely insane. Howard remained silent near the gate. Watching. I noticed Claire didn't look at him again after that. You brought a stranger onto my property behind my back, I said evenly. And somehow I'm the unstable one. We were trying to protect this family, she shot back. No, I interrupted coldly. You were protecting your future access to my money. That hit her hard. I saw it immediately. Claire took a sharp step forward, heels digging into the wet grass. You know what your problem is, Margaret, she hissed. You love playing the victim. After everything Daniel and I deal with, all you care about is yourself. The audacity of that almost stunned me. For years, I had paid their bills quietly. Covered emergencies. Saved vacations. Absorbed every financial disaster they created. And now I was selfish because I finally stopped. Something deep inside me finally stopped hurting in that moment. It hardened instead. I folded my arms slowly. No, Claire. Here's the real problem. My voice dropped lower. Calmer. Deadlier. You didn't lose a mother today. I saw confusion flicker across her face. Then I finished the sentence. You lost a bank. The words landed like a slap. Claire's expression twisted instantly. That's not fair. Fair? I repeated quietly. Was it fair excluding me from the reunion while still expecting me to pay for the house, the pool, the utilities, and half your lifestyle? Her breathing grew faster now. Angrier. Less controlled. You're punishing your own family. No, I said. I'm finally protecting myself from people who learn to confuse dependence with love. For the first time since Walter died. I meant every word completely. Claire opened her mouth again, probably preparing another emotional attack, another guilt speech, another carefully arranged manipulation. I didn't let her start. This house is being sold, I said flatly. Everything stopped. Even the wind seemed to pause. Claire blinked once. What? I met with a broker yesterday, I continued. The process has already started. Color drained from her face so fast it was almost frightening. You can't do that. I nearly smiled at the wording. Not why? Not are you okay? You can't do that. As if my life required permission from her. I can, I replied calmly. And I am. Claire looked genuinely panicked now. Not emotional. Financially panicked. That was when I finally understood the truth completely. This was never about family. It was infrastructure. And I had just shut the system down. Later that afternoon, I sat across from Gregory Hale inside his office once again. This time, I signed the paperwork. The collapse started faster than I expected. 3 days after I signed the paperwork with Gregory, Daniel called me at 6:40 in the morning. Not to apologize. Not to ask how I was doing. To panic. Mom, the mortgage payment bounced. His voice sounded thin and strained, like someone trying to keep water from rising above his neck. In the background, I could hear cabinets slamming and Claire talking loudly to someone. Probably the bank. I sat quietly at my kitchen table, stirring cream into my coffee. I know, I answered. A long silence followed. Then Daniel lowered his voice. The account's overdrawn. Of course it was. For years, my transfers had been quietly covering the gap between their lifestyle and their actual income. Remove that support, and the entire structure started cracking almost immediately. Claire took the phone next. I could hear the shift before she even spoke. Fast breathing. Tight control barely holding together. Margaret, this has gone too far. No, I replied calmly. It's finally reached the truth. You're destroying us financially, she snapped. That sentence stayed with me long after the call ended. destroying us financially. Not emotionally. Not relationally. Financially. Because that was the real emergency. The illusion had finally collapsed. I walked over to the kitchen window and stared out at the backyard where Claire once stood discussing drainage like a future owner. And a painful question returned one more time. Did they ever truly love me? Or did they just love the feeling of always being rescued? The answer hurt less now. Because clarity has a strange way of numbing old wounds. By the following week, the panic became visible. Late payment notices. Calls from utility companies. Daniel texting me at midnight asking if I could temporarily help stabilize things. Temporary. Again. I didn't answer. Instead, I focused on finishing what I had started. Thursday morning, a small moving truck pulled into my driveway. 2 men stepped out carrying clipboards and rolls of inventory stickers. Behind them sat a portable storage container already labeled with Daniel's name. The basement cleanout had officially begun. I walked downstairs slowly while the movers started boxing up old electronics, shipping supplies, folding tables, broken office chairs, and stacks of untouched merchandise Daniel had abandoned months earlier. Dust floated through the basement light with every movement. One of the movers held up a cracked monitor. "You want this kept too?" "Yes," I said. Everything goes. No anger. No revenge speech. Just removal. That was the part nobody talks about. Real boundaries often look boring from the outside. Quiet. Administrative. But to people who built their lives around your access, they feel catastrophic. Around noon, Daniel's car slammed into the driveway hard enough to shake the front windows. He stormed through the front door without knocking. "What the hell is happening?" he shouted. For a moment, I simply looked at him standing there in the hallway breathing hard, panic pouring out of him from every direction. Then I glanced toward the basement door behind him. The new lock caught the light perfectly. And for the first time in years, that sight gave me peace. Daniel stood in my hallway breathing hard while movers carried the last of his storage boxes out through the basement door behind him. For a moment, he looked less like a grown man and more like a frightened teenager who had suddenly realized consequences were real. "Mom, please," he said quietly. "Can we just talk about this?" But before I could answer, another car pulled violently into the driveway outside. Claire. Of course. The front door flew open before I even reached it. She stormed inside without waiting to be invited, face flushed with fury, phone clutched tightly in her hand. "What did you do?" she snapped. "Gregory Hale just called Daniel back. He said the property is under contract." The room went still. Daniel turned toward me slowly. "What does that mean?" I looked at both of them carefully before answering. Then I said the words that finally shattered everything. "The house is sold." Claire physically staggered backward. "No. It closes in 3 weeks. You can't sell the family house," she shouted. Family house. Interesting choice of words from someone who spent months treating me like an outsider. I folded my hands calmly in front of me. "It stopped being a family home the moment you decided I wasn't family enough to enter it." Daniel's face had gone completely pale now. "Mom, where are you going to live?" Finally. A real question. But it arrived far too late. I already bought a condo in Maine, I answered quietly. Claire looked horrified. Not emotional. Strategic. She was calculating everything collapsing in real time. The inheritance. The property value. The future access. Gone. You're destroying this family over a misunderstanding, she whispered. That word again. Misunderstanding. As if years of manipulation were just poor communication. I stepped closer slowly. No, Claire. Here's the truth. My voice stayed calm enough to frighten even me. You spent years treating my life like an asset waiting to transfer ownership. Daniel lowered his eyes immediately. And suddenly I realized something almost tragic. He already knew. Maybe not every detail. Maybe not every calculation. But enough. Enough to stay silent. I looked directly at my son. You already spent your inheritance, I said softly. One check at a time. The shame on his face was instant. Brutal. Claire opened her mouth again, desperate now. We can fix this. No, I interrupted. You can survive it. That's different. Nobody spoke after that. The war was over. Not because I won loudly. Because I finally stopped surrendering. A few minutes later, I walked to the front door and opened it calmly. Claire stared at me in disbelief. You're throwing us out? No, I said quietly. I'm asking you to leave my house. Her expression twisted with rage. Then she started yelling from the porch while Daniel stood frozen beside the driveway, unable to stop either side anymore. Neighbors' curtains shifted nearby. Someone across the street paused while walking their dog. I didn't argue back. I simply closed the door. The shouting became muffled instantly. Then I walked to the living room window and slowly pulled the curtains shut. For the first time in years, the silence inside the house no longer felt lonely. It felt earned. 3 days later, I left the city. Maine was quieter than I expected. Not empty. Not lonely. Just honest. My condo overlooked a small lake surrounded by pine trees and weathered docks. Every morning, seabirds skimmed low across the water while fog rolled softly over the surface like drifting smoke. The place was small compared to the old house. 1 bedroom. Narrow kitchen. Tiny balcony filled with herb pots and chipped ceramic cups. And somehow, I breathed easier there. For the first few weeks, I kept waiting for guilt to arrive. It never did. Instead, I discovered strange little freedoms I hadn't felt in years. Drinking hot tea without interruption. Reading by the window during storms. Falling asleep without wondering who would call next asking for money, favors, rescue. Peace isn't loud after emotional war. It feels unfamiliar at first. One afternoon, I stood on the balcony trimming basil leaves while sunlight reflected across the lake in broken silver patterns. My phone buzzed quietly in my pocket. Daniel. I almost let it ring out. Almost. But something in me had softened with distance. When I answered, his voice sounded different. Smaller somehow. Older. Claire left, he admitted after a long silence. I closed my eyes briefly. When? A month ago. No anger in his voice. No blame. Just exhaustion. He told me the debts had piled up fast after the house sold. The business failed completely. Arguments turned constant. Claire eventually packed her things and moved to Chicago with a friend for space. For space. Funny phrase. Daniel laughed once during the call, but it sounded broken. I think I spent years confusing dependence with love. That sentence stayed with me long after we hung up. Because growth sometimes arrives painfully late. But late is still better than never. A few weeks later, Daniel came to visit alone. No Claire. No excuses. No rehearsed speeches. We walked beside the lake together under a cold gray sky, hands buried in our coat pockets against the wind. I should have said something sooner, he admitted quietly. A long time ago. Yes, I answered. No cruelty. Just truth. He nodded slowly like a man finally learning how much silence can cost. When he left that evening, I sat alone near the water watching small ripples move across the dark surface of the lake. And for the first time in years, my life finally felt like it belonged to me again. Getting older teaches you painful things. You learn that some people love access more than connection. That guilt can become a leash. That generosity without boundaries eventually becomes self-destruction. But age also teaches something else. Boundaries do not destroy families. Selfishness does. And sometimes the kindest thing you can do for yourself is stop rescuing people determined to drown you with them. So before this story ends, I want to ask you something. Because there are people in this world who won't wait for you to die. They'll simply wait for you to become weak enough to take everything quietly. But what happens when those people are your own family? And if someone has ever used your kindness, your money, or your love as a permanent resource instead of a gift, tell me your story in the comments. You are probably not as alone as you think. And if you enjoy stories about family betrayal, emotional boundaries, survival, and late justice, subscribe to the channel. Because some truths only reveal themselves after everything comfortable finally breaks.